I wanted to cover a little bit on what it looks like to build a prophetic culture, and just even give some of our own experience in building that, and on what that's looked like, and some downfalls, and and some really good things, and what it looks like. I think for leaders it can be a little scary, the thought of building a prophetic culture, or even knowing where to start, you know. So I think we'd love to share our hearts and our experience with you, that this would help you with your people building.
Yeah, I think we've made enough mistakes for everybody, so I don't think there are a whole lot of mistakes that you need to make. If we can share those mistakes and share some of the glorious things that have happened, then I think that'd be really, really helpful. We certainly didn't have a prophetic culture. We had at times the gift or the operation of prophecy happening. I would probably say there wasn't a lot of the gift of prophecy, but there's a lot of prophesying that was going on, but there certainly wasn't that culture. And when I kind of encountered Bethel and Reading, I thought, wow, this place is really special, and wondered what was so special about it, and started to read everything they had, listen to everything they had, and realized that the value that we had probably needed the shift, that we wanted to have a value of, say, the culture of honor, but we didn't know how to do it. And reading the book didn't help a lot. It got us fired up about it, it got us passionate about it, but it really didn't help with the nuts and bolts things from it. So we just started a journey. I would say the prophetic culture is probably one of those like deposits of gold that runs right through a healthy church culture, because it affects absolutely everything, absolutely everything. And fundamental to that is this notion of gold and calling out the gold. I think, especially in churches where you have a lot of history in the room, or even regions, as we're kind of experiencing a little bit more of now, where there's a lot of history and relationships that span decades, that there is a lot of history. And the great thing about that history is you kind of like know each other and don't have to build new relationships. But the problem with history is that you end up defining each other by the flesh and not the spirit. So this prophetic culture, I think, allows you to start defining people by the Spirit. It keeps it front and foremost, the need to define people by the Spirit, not by their mistakes, not by your bumping in with them at times, not by the fact they've disappointed you, let you down, etc. But you get to define each other by their call, their destiny, all of that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, and I think prophetic culture is something when people come in, they experience, and they don't always know what it is they're experiencing, but it's because you have built a place that is always looking for the gold, that you're not just the leadership, but your people are so trained in looking for the gold, and people calling out. It's a culture of encouragement. It's a culture of always seeing from heaven's perspective. And that's so, I mean, that's the thing that will change people, I think, the most, is just being in a place that is safe, that is encouraging. I mean, it's really how all of us grow, isn't it? It's through encouragement.
Yeah, I think this word culture is everywhere. If you look at trends within the business community at the minute, changing your company's culture is huge, and developing a culture is huge. And we talk about culture all the time, and it's culture this, culture that, and everything's a culture. And it's a prophetic culture, it's a culture of honor, it's a culture of sonship, it's a culture of generosity, everything's a culture.
Yeah.
So what exactly is a culture? What does this culture look like? For me, it's kind of the atmosphere. It's the atmosphere that people walk into. That piece where Saul is anointed and then comes down the hill and meets his company of prophets, and he starts prophesying. Well, he walked into an atmosphere. He walked into something that even allowed people to say, well, hold on, is Saul now a prophet? Is he considered to be part of this company of prophets? And it is that atmosphere that's created. Notice that atmosphere is created largely by values and by language. So there's a great move everywhere if we can just make everybody's language the same. That would be really dull, in my humble opinion. I think Esperanto was the attempt to make one global world language, and that was a miserable failure and has been a miserable failure. So I think language actually contributes to culture. It doesn't take away from culture. So having language around it, having language around what our values are and what our practices are, I think is really important. And that value of seeing people according to heaven's call in their life, according to how God sees them, is really important. Ultimately, he is a good father. He's not an angry father. He's not a bitter father. He has never once looked at me and said, I wish I didn't make Ian. He has never once looked at Rachel and said, I wish I'd never made her.
Yeah.
And I think he's exactly the same with you. He has never regretted making you. And yet we don't always do relationships like that. So moving it from our earthly eyes to our heavenly eyes and saying, hey, what does heaven say about this person is really important. And it changes your life. It changes how you donate to the guys who are obviously scamming you for money outside, whatever store it is. It changes your heart towards them. It changes your behavior and your actions towards them. So values become really important, and understanding what values you have. But the great myth within Christendom is because I have this value means it's a godly value. It's not always true. There are values that are political and religious in nature, and there are values that are handed down from our parents. And they're not always like endorsed by heaven, or they don't always have heaven's mark on them. They might be neutral, or they might be anti-Christ. But they, we need to approach our values just to say, hey, I'm open to changing these. What we did is we started to look around at places and say, well, what are their values? What values do they have? And what do I need to change, and how do I need to change in order to embrace that value?
Yeah, and I think sometimes as a leadership, you think you have the values in place until you realize you don't. So even in building this place, this culture, this set of values, it's really important, as Ian said, to know what those values are, because everything flows from the top down. Everything will flow from you as a leader to the congregation, to people in your church. So if you're not practicing, if you're not actually speaking into the values, they won't be established, and so you won't really build a strong foundation that a prophetic culture will be built on. So it is something that has to be owned by the leadership, that is actually by all of the leadership, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're not going to create a culture around you that you don't have inside you.
Yeah.
So you're the first person to work on it. You get to do that. You get to go after it. And for me, that means you go to everything. So if you're a fan of Danny Silk, you go to everything that Danny is doing. Like, make the sacrifice, make the commitment, financially sow into him. Make that commitment, make the sacrifice. Like, you're not going to get here without it costing you something. Read everything he has, download everything he has, listen to everything he has that's out there, and just sort of like become a little bit of, I was going to say a stalker. I don't mean a stalker.
Don't be
stalking him. That would not be a good idea. And I don't want him coming back to me on this one. So, but if this is the person, if you're going after T.D. Jakes' culture, then you go after that culture. You go after it with everything.
Yeah.
Because if it's not changed in here, it's not going to be changed here.
Yeah.
And truthfully, you won't know what your value is until conflict arises. Like, we don't know what anything is until conflict arises. We've been married for quite a long time.
A long time.
And, when we got married, we're going down the wedding. Well, Rachel's coming down the aisle. I see Rachel. It's fantastic. This is it. Our life starts right here in this church in Belfast.
We had never had an argument.
We had never had an argument. Never. We thought we were too much in love.
We thought we were so different to everybody else.
We thought we were too much in love to ever have an argument, that we got each other and no one had been in love.
No
like
one
we
is
were.
was
Like,
as
really.
no one had ever experienced what we experienced.
So we didn't actually know what our marriage was until
Yeah.
conflict was introduced. We didn't know what the relationship was until conflict was
Right.
introduced. And I would suggest you don't know what your value is until conflict is introduced. And it is that point of, am I going to behave the way I've always behaved? Am I going to let my past define my destiny, or am I going to let and we're going to let that influence finish here and actually live from the future? So don't be afraid of conflict either. But yeah, you won't create around you what's not inside you. And how you change what's inside you is by focus and going after it, not by just reading one book and thinking, wow, this is amazing, let's do that. So.
Yeah, I think it is getting as much help as you possibly can, especially if you're starting from scratch, if you want to build this, if this seems attractive to you, if it's something you're hungry for. I think there has to be a real hunger, because it will cost.
Yeah.
Like, it costs having a prophetic culture. It costs because you have to build so many values that you may not have at the minute, and like the culture of honor, like sonship, like teaching on the whole subject of being a son or daughter of God, and what that means. You know, everything sounds really attractive until you start digging into it, and it means that people may have to change.
Right.
And it is like Ian says, you know, it's the conflict. You will experience conflict because people don't always like change. So
Yeah, we love to post stuff that means, hey, God is saying stuff that means I don't have to change, which is amazing. And it's just not true. He is in the business of transformation. We're supposed to be becoming like him. And my guess is, if we're becoming like him, he isn't changing. We're the ones that need to change. So
yeah,
the prophetic stuff is really, really encouraging. We love it. We love the culture. I mean, it's totally worth like paying the price for. I would say that it changes, and there are certain markers in your journey that everything sort of changes. Like, we're at the place where we're actually raising up prophets. So the question is, can you have a prophetic culture without there being a prophet? And I would say absolutely not. Like, the word prophetic is not an attempt to remove the grace of the prophet, but it is a great starting point. But the minute you start raising up a person to be that prophet, or a number of people to be prophets, or raising up a company of prophets in a church or a region, then you do start to then hit, you know, another barrier to growth, because people are afraid. They're afraid of what this means. If I'm raising up apostles and saying, hey, the word apostolic we need to remove it from our vocabulary, people get like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense, but I'm terrified. So I would suggest that you have a prophet, and it may be outside your church, but it would be somebody that you're actually in relationship with, that can actually speak into the life of your church. We have definitely had that over the years, where there's been a couple that have spoken to the life of the church and have shaped our prophetic culture. Way before Bethel, we started to hear about, you know, only prophesying encouragement and only prophesying from heaven, not from earth. And it was kind of a life-changing thing. So
really
I would
was.
always recommend that you have, you can have many teachers, but have one father or mother. Have many teachers, but have one father or mother, because we don't want to start doing a poll of our fathers and mothers to see who agrees with me that I don't need to change. We need a voice, not an echo. We need a voice speaking into our culture, not an echo, not just someone who's going to reflect back everything I need to see. That's really one of the downfalls of I think, the prophetic culture. So within a prophetic culture, you can actually create overconfident leaders who believe that God has spoken, that they are the next Bill Johnson, and they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they don't think they have to learn anything, or they just become overconfident. And in that overconfidence, oftentimes one of the downfalls is that an overconfidence bred by the prophetic. And in that overconfidence, what people are looking for is an echo, not a voice. because it's really hard to be changed. So throughout all of what we do, we have this place of sonship. And this place is sonship. I actually have a t-shirt that says, "Don't be a wee bastard." And it's a quote from the King James Version of Hebrews, which is that if you cannot take discipline, correction, then you are illegitimate. You are a bastard, it says in the King James Version. So we try to promote a culture that says, hey, I actually might be wrong. Like even when we're working through stuff currently, there's that thing like, I don't really like this. I don't really like this. But hey, that could be just me. Like we could be the one that's wrong in this. And instead of looking for people to just affirm that they don't like it as well, we want to hear voices speaking into our lives to say, hey, you committed to doing this. You actually made a commitment to this. So can you do, like, that's the long-term goal. Can you just keep going towards this? And we kind of find that like super helpful to calm storms all around us, you know?
I think the thing is, sometimes we're afraid of people, especially who come to the church and say they're prophetic or say they're prophets even, but won't take any feedback, won't be adjusted, and won't be corrected. And so those people, in Danny Silk's words, are scary. And it is having people who will be willing to be corrected and who are willing to be adjusted and will let you speak into their lives. Because if they're not a son and daughter, like for me, that's the being a son and daughter is being adjustable, because you do need people around you. So if the people who are prophetic won't let you do that, then they're not going to grow, and they're going to scare you as a leader more than anything, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the issue of sonship is essentially an issue of submission, and I think there's been so much abuse of that word in the church that everybody has to submit to me because I have a title or I have a role or I have an office in the church. But that's not really what submission is. Submission is simply recognizing who has the authority in that environment. So if you are Bill Johnson and you come into me, if you're the President of the United States of America and come into my home and tell me how to raise my kids, I'm going to go, no. If you're the Queen of England and come into my house and tell me how to raise my kids, I'm going to go, no. Like, we have the authority how to raise our kids. We have the authority to make those mistakes and to do those good things. So the issue of submission within the prophetic is who's in charge. And the problem is people that are hearing really, really well or even really badly from God think that they are the ones with the authority. So training your people within that culture to say, hey, let's recognize who has the authority. I may attend this church, but I don't have a lot of authority in the church. I'm not saying I couldn't use authority. I'm saying I choose not to use authority because I don't actually have the authority in the church. So I think it's really important to recognize what who has the authority, who gets the say. 20 years ago, when the whole prophetic movement, I don't even know it was a prophetic movement, but certainly there were a bunch of people prophesying. And we would get the one hurt woman in our church who would come and like have to stand up every Sunday and say, "Thus saith the Lord, you're an abomination unto the eyes of Jesus, and he's coming to destroy you." And
like that.
Just like that. And of course, pastors, church leaders would go, I don't really know how to deal with this because first of all, I love Jesus. And if this is Jesus speaking, I don't want to ignore him. But I don't think it's Jesus speaking. Yeah. But they're coming with a funny voice and all this prophetic training, so I don't know what to do with it. So then a lot of people just close down the prophetic.
Yeah.
And I think we're coming to a healthier place now, especially with, we don't just want to raise up prophets and apostles. We want to raise up healthy prophets and apostles, not just people who are going to come in and lord it over those who actually have the authority.
Yeah.
So all that being said, I think that the journey of creating a prophetic culture within your church, your ministry, or even your business is really, really worth it. Like creating heaven's culture on earth makes it a lot easier for heaven to invade earth. That's the truth of it. Yeah, and while we believe the kingdom has come, we also believe the kingdom is advancing. So we want to see more of the kingdom, not less of the kingdom. So creating this culture is one of the best ways that we have found to do it. But there's definitely a process with it. I would say don't be afraid. Start with yourself. Go after whoever it is that you're listening to, like whose voice is that you're listening to, and please don't do it remotely. Please just don't do it with someone who is 4,000 miles away and has no interest in who you are, will never have an interest in who you are because you came late to the party. Try to pick someone that you can actually glean from and who can shape who you are, shape your ministry, and shape what it is you do. So can't recommend it highly enough. I think it also comes with raising up the, prophecy, the gift of prophecy and prophets itself. And I think that's part of a journey. So we kind of did it in that order, but maybe that order is shifting for people, and they'll start to raise up prophets first, who'll then, healthy prophets, who'll then sort of like develop all of this stuff. So I would say if you need anything else, why don't you contact Rachel? So just drop her a line on this course stuff, on this website. Contact her, whatever way the contact means is on this course stuff, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear if there's anything we can do to help. If there's any questions we can answer, we'd love to do that.
Yeah, and I would just say a prophetic culture affects everything in your church. It affects your worship. It affects your kids' ministry. It affects how you pray for healing. It affects how you minister on a Sunday morning. It will bleed into everything in a great way. Like it just makes everything different, and it is so attractive, and it makes a place where heaven, as Ian said, can land. Like heaven is very attracted to a prophetic culture, because there's just that awareness of heaven always being around you and with you. And you're always looking for it. Like it is just, it is something you're always looking for as well, that you want, and that there's a real hunger for, and that you as a leader get to create that hunger in your church and in your congregation. And I believe like heaven cannot resist hunger, that heaven responds to our hunger. So.
One last thing I would say is that your prophetic people will need pastored. So that means your whole pastoral ministry needs to be involved in this prophetic culture, because they need pastored through this. We don't pastor people through the sword of the prophetic gift. We pastor people through our pastors, and that's really important. So even as this increases, the need for the other 4 fivefold graces also kind of increases as well. Anyway, bless you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking part, and please be in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Bless you.